Hello everyone, my name is Ming Yuan. I am a board certified music therapist, also a PhD candidate at Drexel University in Philadelphia, PA in the US. I have been practicing as a music therapist for more than 10 years, working almost exclusively with autistic people, and currently am collaborating with autistic advocates and leaders in the autistic rights movement here in the US in challenging what we understand about therapies and supports and treatments for autistic folks, and challenging what we have learned about autism, and finding new ways to work with this community. A little bit about myself. I am born in Kuala Lumpur and raised in Malacca, and came to the US when I was 17 to pursue my studies, and currently am trying to finish my studies. And I would love to share a little bit of what I've learned with you so far. So before we get into challenging what we understand about autism, let's go a little bit into the background of autism. DSM-3 is the first time we include autism in the DSM. And then in DSM-4, we start to understand the nuances of autism. So they have different diagnoses like autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder, childhood integrative disorder, pervasive developmental disorder. Those all come under the umbrella of autism. That's why they call autism a spectrum. And then with the current, most latest version of DSM, DSM-5, all of that is being put under one label, which is called autistic spectrum disorder. And to get diagnosed with autism, one has to have persistent deficits. That means there has to be deficits or differences in social communication and social interaction, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities, and they have to be present in the early developmental period of the person. And there has to be clinically significant differences or impairments, as according to DSM-5, in social, occupational, and other important areas of functioning. So, as we see, even with the definitions of autism, it has evolved across the years as we understand more and more what autism is about. Yet these all are coming from the medical and psychiatric community, and we have to understand that even within an evidence-based practice that's based on research and expert opinion, there has to be a lot of things that we have to unpack here. One concept that I would like for us to explore is the concept of ableism. That means there is a discrimination in favor of the enabled. So that's for me, enabled is the opposite of disabled. We will explore that a little bit more in the future slides. With ableism, it is the idea that a person's abilities or characteristics are determined by disability, and therefore people with disabilities as a group are inferior to enabled people. And this exists and permeates through all parts of our society. In the US, at least 50% of people with disabilities experience poverty. I would dare say that in Malaysia, it's way more than 50%. In the US, there are some states where it is still legal to forcibly sterilize people with disabilities, and the unemployment rate of people with disabilities has never been below 70%. I would dare say that in Malaysia, it's way higher than that. And let's unpack ableism when we are describing autism. Earlier in the DSM-5, we talk about autism as an impairment, right? And even our language around autism, we in my generation of therapists, we were taught to use person-first language. That means person with autism, person with this and that. But as we are learning about the experience of autism from autistic people, there's this beautiful quote right here. Autism isn't something a person has or a shell that a person is trapped inside. There's no normal child hidden behind the autism. Autism is a way of being. It is pervasive. It colors every experience, every sensation, perception, thought, emotion, and encounter, every aspect of existence. It is not possible to separate the autism from the person, and if it were possible, the person you'd have left would not be the same person you started with. This is a very important sentence to consider. With a lot of treatments for autism, there's a move towards normalcy that is pervasive. So trying to help the child be as normal as possible. Yet, as we are understanding about the lived experience of autistic people, and when we're doing more neurological scans of autistic folks, we are understanding that with neurodiversity, autistic brains are wired differently, and we are trying to force them to not be themselves. And this, in turn causes autistic folk trauma and harm, as we are forcing them to be someone they are not at all. So, with real-world examples, that was the lofty clinical thing, which a lot of us attendants, I believe, are folks that work with disabled folks. But when we are talking about real-world examples, we see that with our family members of autistic folk often have at least a moderate disability prejudice. And this is socially dictated, and culturally too. There is an expectation of what one needs to be to succeed in the world, to thrive in like a place in Malaysia. When folks, when we have a disabled member of the family, suddenly our whole family dynamics change. We shelter ourselves from the world. We try to protect the disabled member from the outside world as much as possible. We use terms that do not celebrate their identity and see them as a burden, even though we don't mean to. But words matter, and disabled folks are treated as burdens in our family and society. And therefore, disabled people also themselves often have internalized ableism. That means a discrimination towards their own disability. And in academia and research, we are not free from concepts of ableism either. Autism is seen as a recent phenomena or an epidemic. Well, if we look historically, there are quite a few historical figures that if the term autism was around, they would have been diagnosed as autistic. The goal of autism intervention or treatment is a return to normalcy. That means autistic people are inherently diseased, and there's something about autism that needs to be fixed so they can be human again. These are forms of ableism within healthcare and treatments and supports for disabled folks that we have to challenge. Biomedical treatments, interventions are most effective means of improving quality of life as opposed to services. That is something that we also have to unpack too. In the US and the UK, perhaps the most well-known organization that talks about autism would be Autism Speaks. But Autism Speaks itself is rooted in the concept that autism has to be eradicated. That means we have to find the autism gene and eradicate it. But that does so much harm to autistic folks that are currently living. So much funds goes into genetic markers and environmental markers, while living and breathing autistic folks are not getting the services or supports they need to cope with a world that is not built for them. And there are also comparatively limited opportunities or quality of life improvements in adults as compared to children. So much of supports go being funded into children. If you see a lot of our news reports or media reports, yes, children are being modeled as the people that need most help, but at some point these children grow up too. And once they're out of school, the school systems, they're left to their own devices. But these folks need some form of support, and funding needs to be allocated there. Other versions of ableism that exists is the R word. It is being understood right now as a form of a discriminatory word, but if we watch any TV shows from like 5 or 10 years ago, that is used quite frequently. If we watch current media in Malaysia, the R word is being used consistently. Another example of ableism within our society is the use of autism, a puzzle piece to describe autism. And autistic folks and autistic advocates find that very discriminatory. They don't experience themselves as a puzzle piece that needs to be figured out or to be put together. It actually demeans their human self when we use the puzzle piece to symbolize them. That's why they are actively against organizations like Autism Speaks, because they still continue to use the puzzle piece as a way to describe autism. And another thing is that we enact ableism upon disabled folks is that we use language that skirts around disability. That means we see disability as an inherently bad word. Like there's something wrong with it. But for folks, disabled folks, the word disability just describes them. It's just like I describe myself as a Malaysian Chinese man, cisgender, straight. So these are mostly words that put me in a place of privilege, but less so in the US. The word disability is just a descriptor. It's not a bad word. Actually, the more we try to skirt around the word disabled, like using words like handy-capable, differently abled, even the word special, which is quite, I know I'm challenging right now because our conference, the organization, the word special is within that. But what makes it special? Why are we hesitating to use the word disabled rather than and we are more comfortable using words that skirt around it like special? That means we are putting value on the word disabled, making it a bad word, making the lived experience of disabled people essentially bad. And words have power. My focus of research is in critical theory and discourse analysis. That means that we understand power dynamics between people in power and people and marginalized folks. And then when the way that the research goes is we analyze the words that are being used to describe phenomena, and then we challenge that and we get new knowledge through that. It's a qualitative research process. So with all these ableist systems that are ingrained within our culture, within our systems, how do we challenge that? How do we be better in supporting our autistic community members? Autistic folks have been doing that for quite a while now. They have been working really hard in reclaiming the term autism. With the work of autistic advocates, they have expanded the criteria of autistic people, expanded avenues of communication, and then started huge advocacy movements. There are now associations and communities of autistic people that are led by autistic people for autistic people, working in partnership with autistic or neurotypical people. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of autism advocacy. It was first started by parents. Their goal is for awareness, treatment, and research on autism. And their primary goal was for normalization. They wanted their children to be as normal as possible or eradicate autism altogether. And this is stemmed from stigmatization, not only from society, but within themselves. There is a stigma around the concept of autism. If you look at media, the way they portray autism, it's all pretty discriminatory without any consulting any autistic people in the process. It's our opinion about what autism is and how to tug at people's heartstrings. After there were these parent-led organizations, there came Autism Network International, because these children that were trying to benefit from the organizations led by their parents, they realized that their needs are not being met in parent and healthcare professional-led organizations. So the Autism Network International was first run for and by autistic individuals. And currently in Malaysia, there is one organization like that. I had the pleasure of presenting at one of their conferences. It's called AIM, Autism Initiators Malaysia, which is led by autistic folks for autistic folks. And that is, and most of their work is for support of autistic folks to get through school, to build a community amongst each other, and to collaborate with people who support autistic people, and also help autistic people get jobs in Malaysia. So I'm going to share with you a different definition of autism right here. This is by the autism by ASAN, which is an autistic folks led group for autism advocacy. So they describe autism as a neurological variation that occurs in about 1% of the population and is classified as a developmental disability. Now you see that they do not skirt around the word disability, and they describe autism as a neurological variation instead of a deficit. Now, I have to be very clear here that they do not see autism as merely a variation. They recognize that being autistic in this world means that they are being disabled from the systems that run the world. When I talk about systems and culture, I mean that the majority have set this expectation of what it is to be normal. And we'll describe that later. But with this, with ASAN, they describe autism as having different sensory experiences. There are non-standard ways of learning and approaching problem solving. There are deeply focused thinking and passionate interest in specific subjects. There's atypical, sometimes repetitive movement. There's a need for consistency, routine, and order. There's difficulties in understanding and expressing language as used in typical communication. And there's also difficulties in understanding and expressing typical social interaction. Now you see that with this definition, it broadens and deepens our understanding of autism. With the previous slide with the DSM-5, it's all focused on the differences that are being seen as deficits in our current society and culture. However, with this explanation of autism, it shares the strengths of autistic people too, as well as things that they need support in. So that's why there's this big difference between the medical model of autism and the social model of autism. So the DSM-5 definition lies within the medical model of autism. It presumes that autistic traits are the inevitable source of challenges faced by autistic people. The evaluations for diagnostic purposes also serves as the focus of treatment, which means that we use these diagnostic tools for autism, like the ADOS or the SRS-2 to measure the treatment effectiveness. That means within the medical model, the less autistic you are, the more normal you are. And the focus of intervention effectiveness is on removal of autistic traits. Now let's turn that around and look at the social model of autism. Okay, so within the medical model, it's totally understandable where you see an illness, you want to treat it. Autism is being seen as an illness and a disability. Whereas with the social model of disability and autism, we understand disability as there's the majority and there's a minority. Majority of the world right now are neurotypical people, while there's a minority of the world that are autistic. That means that they have less power and the majority has more power. And the people in more power say that this is normal human conduct, this is normal human system and culture. While the autistic folks, you don't have enough numbers. So what you're doing is weird and wrong, and we need to fix that so you can be more like us. Okay? So the social model of autism is associated with the neurodiversity movement, which advocates for there's a diversity of how human brains are functioning and created. So anywhere between ADHD to autism to different kinds of disorders and disabilities, that's just a normal part of humankind right now, the more we understand about how human brains function. The outcomes and challenges from autistic traits are mediated by social and policy context. That means that the challenges that they face are enhanced because our systems and policies and culture is not built for autistic people. That means the issue here is primarily with social constructs rather than their autism. And then diagnostic measures may not serve as an appropriate goal for intervention because you're trying to force someone's brain to be more like other people's brain, which causes them harm. And these diagnostic measures we use in the medical model, you're just trying to force them to be more like someone else essentially making traumatizing them, forcing them to mask who they truly are as unique, beautiful beings that have unique things to contribute to society. Um, so, with the social model of autism, intervention effectiveness should focus on quality of life, skills, goals as defined by the individual and community preferences, and the larger cultural context. We'll describe that later. So this is from an autistic self-advocate in the UK. Separating the person from their autism is damaging, as it reinforces opinions about autism as being a thing that can be removed, something that may be unpleasant and unwanted, and something that is not just another aspect of a whole, complete, and perfect individual human being. We cannot remove the autism from a person. Like, you cannot remove the Malaysian Chinese out of me, or the male identifying part of me. There's no way to remove that. And that is something that a lot of us in the helping profession, in teaching, in education, in mental health, in healthcare in general, we are starting to grapple with. What we understood about autism is different from what autistic people's lived experiences are, and what we're trying to do to help them might be actually causing them further harm than good. This is not just my words. These are quotes from other researchers. The first person used a feminist critical lens to examine neurodiversity and found that it was born out of the neurodiverse population's need for better services that appreciated the population as whole beings to be valued. That means these are autistic folks that felt like the services they were getting, maybe it was the kind of education they were getting, or maybe it was the ABA they were getting, or other forms of help. It wasn't addressing what they actually need. The next two authors agreed that neurodiversity movement could ensure better services for the neurodiverse population. That means autistic advocates are not here just to cause trouble. They're there to advocate for a better quality of life for them, better services for them. They're not saying that they don't need help or services, because it will take generations and generations ahead of us for us to dismantle our current system and design it to with the consciousness of celebrating and making our system accessible for everyone, especially those most impacted, which are autistic people in this context. In the last article, they explored the movement through a critical lens and found that the society as a whole had a need to re-examine its understanding and, most importantly, its biases about the neurodiverse population. So consider that. Maybe we need to challenge ourselves a little bit more about what is our understanding about autism. Is what the DSM-5 said about autism true? Is what we learned in our textbooks true? Is what we learned from the media true? Why have we not consulted people who are experts of their own lived experiences about autism? Why have we not done that? So the implications of adopting a social model of autism has many benefits. We could increase positive identity around autism to make it less of a dirty word, just like disabled. We want to celebrate who they are. Like, we want to celebrate our Malaysianness. We want to celebrate our Chinese, Malay, Indianness, our identity as men, woman, or anything. We do not reduce our efforts to teach adaptive skills. We shift from promoting indistinguishability from autistic to neurotypical people to person-centered goals. That means how can we help that autistic person be the best autistic person they can be to contribute to their society, to invest in their interests, to improve their quality of life. And then we can understand autism through a diversity lens. That means we can see disability and autism as a culture, just like Chinese as a culture, or Malay as a culture, or Indian as a culture, or even religious culture, or yeah, what can we understand about autism if we understand it as a culture, a unique culture that's woven into the fabric of humankind? So the next part of this presentation, I'll be sharing you recommendation from autistic folks about what they want from supports and therapies and school. So this was a research done that was in collaboration with autistic folks, because they believe that service providers could benefit from firsthand accounts on autistic people's needs and experiences. So in this study, 10 people across the US were interviewed. This was a small but strong qualitative study. These 10 autistic people received different services throughout their childhood, like ABA, floor time, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And through these interviews, the researcher found these important values in support and treatment for autistic folks. The first one is to promote positive outcomes and prevent harm. Autistic folks want to learn skills that help them understand their own disabilities. They need help with coping with sensory overload. What they do not want is normalization. They want to learn how to celebrate their autistic identity and thrive as autistic people within a society that is not quite built for them. The other part is they want to protect autonomy. That means we need to seek their consent in everything they do. They want us to respect their yes or no. And when they say no, it does mean no, and not coerce through the no. They want therapists to be inclusive. They want us to teach, support, and facilitate them in their process to learn self-advocacy skills. They want supports and teachers and all that to provide accessibility options in sessions or in their workplace or in therapy or in school. That means the use of technology, like assistive communication technology, or changing the environment of their classroom or their workplace for them to access these workplaces. They want to be integrated into community. They want to be a part of their community. They want therapists to be trauma sensitive. That means they want us to avoid re-traumatization for people living in systems that are not built for them. Autistic folks are already traumatized by this world that's not built for them, by all the loud, by sensory overload, by meltdowns, and just all kinds of adverse things in their world. What we can do as helpers, as therapists, as supporters, as educators, is to be sensitive to your trauma and to avoid re-traumatizing them. And the last thing is also cultural competency. That means we have to understand autistic folks, just like everyone else, as an intersection of multiple identities. That means, such as myself, I hope people understand that I am simultaneously Malaysian, Chinese, young adult, middle-class person, having had international work and education experience, living with a chronic health condition. Um, yeah, all these things into being and inform myself about who I am and plays into the dynamics of my relationship with another person. And for autistic folks, they want folks to understand them not just for their autism, but also how complex their identity is on top of being autistic. So another way that we can radically challenge our paradigm is to partner with autistic stakeholders. Currently, with most healthcare and education and support system with autistic people, we are around the low rank of this. We're still coercing folks. We're still doing medical assessments. We're still doing this top-down educating. We're doing this upon them. What we need to move towards is the next step. The next step is engaging the autistic community, consulting with the autistic community, having them and then informing them. So we're doing this for them. But what is truly best for autistic stakeholders, what they truly want, they want to have a big say in what they need. That means it's community controlled. Information about autism, for instance, or the supports and therapies they need, the education they need. They want to be a prime stakeholder in that. They want to co-produce information about them. They want to co-design systems that involve them. This is important because when we're talking about disability or autism, autistic folks are the most impacted by systems that are not built for autistic people. That's why they have to have the biggest say. We have to make space for them to share their thoughts and to honor their for us to honor their thoughts and respect their thoughts and have that be the biggest consideration when we are designing our protocols or our paradigms. For researchers, we have to be aware that power imbalances naturally exist between the researcher and autistic partners. These power imbalances must be addressed to allow for equality and equity. That means research must not be done on them. Research must be done in collaboration with autistic folks so that we do not cause further harm on autistic folks through our own research. And it is important to accommodate for different communication needs. This applies to everyone who works with autistic folk or who are friends with autistic folk. That means we cannot just primarily focus on verbal language. We have to accommodate and make it different forms of communication accessible for autistic folks. We also have to recognize that there are brilliant autistic people who are researchers and seek to recruit them to both sides of the table, not just participants, but also to be co-collaborators in the research. And we, most importantly, do not make anyone the token autistic. We have to invite and include many autistic voices from diverse backgrounds and experiences. Well, that's it for my presentation today. Hopefully I have left you with a lot of questions and answers. This presentation is not meant to answer questions about autism. It's not meant to give you a quick fix to your current practice or to your research project. But I hopefully gave you questions to challenge what you understand about disability and autism, and how do you recognize the ableism that exists within you and within us and challenge that. Thank you so much.